Welcome to the Britain Palestine Project podcast, part of our wider mission to promote peace with justice, security, and equal rights for Israelis and Palestinians. I'm Deanna Safier, writer, podcaster, and events manager here at the Britain Palestine Project. You'll hear from historians, diplomats, activists, and witnesses as we examine urgent humanitarian and political issues and unpack the complexities, confront the truths, and explore what a just and peaceful future could look like. Thank you for joining us. Let's get started. This is a webinar on Palestine-Israel challenging the British government. We've got two of our trustees, a trustee and our chair here joining us today. So we've got Andrew Whitley. He is our chair, the chair of the Britain Palestine Project, and he's the founder and executive director of Geopolitical Advisory Services, a UK-based consultancy that works on the alleviation of armed conflict in the Middle East and Asia. He was previously the policy director and interim chief executive of the Elders and a journalist with the BBC and Financial Times. He was the founding director of Human Rights Watch Middle East and North Africa Division, then known as Middle East Watch. And at the UN, he held senior posts at UNCTAD and the Department of Peacekeeping Operations, and at UNRWA. We're also joined today by our trustee, Sir Vincent Fean. He is a retired member of the British Diplomatic Service, and his last post was Consul General, Jerusalem, from 2010 to 2014. Before Jerusalem, he was also ambassador to Libya and previously a High Commissioner to Malta. Vincent advocates equal rights for Israelis and Palestinians and the British government recognition of the State of Palestine along Israel on pre-June 1967 lines. And as mentioned, he is one of our trustees. So I'm going to hand over to you, Vincent, first, and I'll be back for Q&A.
Many thanks indeed, Dee. Thank you for the intro, and greetings, Andrew. I'll begin, if I may, with a question for you, Andrew, which is to set the scene. Where are we now? We're recording and screening this webinar live as Prime Minister Starmer is talking to his cabinet about Gaza and a future plan. And also in New York, we're into day 2 of a 3-day conference on a two-state solution and a path to peace. So it's a timely conversation, but where do you think we are in terms of life and times, both on the ground and in policy?
Thanks, Vincent. I think this is a decisive moment. I know it's very easy to say that, but I've been following this issue for 40 years now, since 1985, when I first went to the West Bank as the FT's correspondent there. And I have never seen anything as bad nor as dramatic as the current drama going on, the awful humanitarian situation in Gaza. I don't have words for it, which many people would consider meets the standards of genocide. The actions in the West Bank, which amount to de facto annexation, the way in which Israel has been flouting international law with complete impunity until now, with very mild slaps on its wrist. But at the same time, we have a public opinion around the world, I would say, which is totally enraged and says this cannot go on. And I think governments are increasingly coming under pressure, including our own. This is why Prime Minister Starmer has called that meeting right now to be able to consider how Britain should be acting. I think you would probably agree with me, I hope you would, that Britain's actions in the last couple of years have been characterized by a little bit too little, too late, being dragged into making some minor concessions, if you like, or minor slaps on the wrist, but they haven't really changed the dial. We have seen that France has said that it intends to recognize Palestine in September. That's an important step, which we've been advocating for. We hope, I believe we all hope that Britain will follow suit and that there will be some meaningful consequences from that. We don't want this to be an empty action. The Financial Times today had a very strong, powerful editorial on this particular subject. This all adds up to a mounting pressure that this simply cannot continue. But then beyond that expression, I think we have to ask ourselves, What is it that's going to persuade Israel to change course? Israel is a democratic country. We don't like its government today, but nevertheless, it's a democratically elected one. But it's pursuing policies which are in occupied territories for which the international community has a responsibility for the protection of that population, and at the same time for the advancement of Palestinian rights, which have been promised since 1948. So I'd say things could go either way at this stage. There is a possibility that sufficient political will could be gathered in order to be able to have concerted action, which is what I think is needed. There is a possibility that the actions will be brushed off like water off a duck's back by the Israeli government, and they will proceed further with actions that they have been openly airing on Gaza, annexation of part of it, cornering part of the population, or perhaps all of the Gazan population, in a small area around Rafah, preparing for them to be forced to leave the countries. Things could get worse. I don't think it's guaranteed that things will get better, but I do believe that we have the ability to try to make a difference.
I agree with you, Andrew, on all counts. I just add that as far as the Palestinian body politic is concerned, in Ramallah, the Palestinian Authority is very much under pressure from Israel. There was a time when I was in Jerusalem when the Palestinian Authority was tolerated, even mildly supported by the Israeli government. But that's changed. The Israelis are withholding $2.6 billion of tax remittances from the Palestinian Authority. So they're having great difficulty in just staying alive economically. And the economy of the West Bank is in free fall, with lockdowns around every city, and almost a total impossibility to get from A to B. So we are at a time of dire need in Gaza primarily, but also in the West Bank, and we'll come on later to the issue of settler violence in the West Bank. I was talking to GB News on Sunday, and the question that I was asked there is, can a democratic state like Israel really be blamed for doing what it's doing? Well, it's democratically elected in the pre-June 67 lines, but it's not democratically elected in Gaza and the West Bank.
Exactly.
Those people have no right to vote. They are disenfranchised. They have no say in who runs them. And currently we have a one-state reality, which is to the detriment of the Palestinians. And I do believe that we're at a crossroads, because this Israeli government may be determined to shunt out of Gaza to anywhere and nowhere 2.2 million people. It's unconscionable, it's unthinkable, but it's planned. And I agree with you that we need the European Union, the UK, which is independent now, of course, and can make its own way, the United States, to intervene in these matters and to stop Israel from going down a road which is to the detriment of Israel long term, as well as to the now catastrophe for the Palestinians. But may I come on to one thing that you've touched upon, Andrew, which is the French-Saudi axis, if I can call it that, the conference that is underway currently in New York. It's an interesting combo between France and the Saudis, from Macron and Mohammed bin Salman. They're both not at the conference, actually, but I think Macron is planning to do more in September in the margins of the UN General Assembly. But how do you see that playing out? Can it produce a plan that might stop Israel and produce an alternative that is acceptable to the wider world?
What I know is that there has been solid preparatory work. There have been 8 committees that have been working for some time, and you might raise your eyebrows at the fact that, committees doing paper plans, where is it going to go? Is it going to be realized? But I think it was solid, realistic work in different fields. The UK and Egypt co-chair the humanitarian working group, and that working group has presented its reports to this conference. And what I understand is supposed to happen is that the working groups will then be charged with implementation of their plans. Now, that all depends very much on the political and security situation in Gaza in particular, but also the reunification of Gaza with the rest of the West Bank. At the moment, Israel is dead set against that. That is a big hurdle to be able to ensure that there is genuinely a reunification of the territory that's meant to be part of a single Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital, as governments repeatedly say. So I take some comfort from this conference. It's the only political game in town at the moment, therefore it needs to be supported. But at the same time, I don't think it has a magic solution for how this is going to happen. At the end of the day, it is political will to be able to ensure that the two-state solution is actually realized. Many people think that this has gone too far. I myself have had my doubts about it, about whether a two-state solution in the terms of a viable, sovereign, contiguous Palestinian state, all the words that the UN says, whether that is possible any longer. In theory it is, but it means that a large number of settlers will have to be withdrawn from beyond the Green Line, or else some other kind of political arrangement has to come up with. But at the end of the day, I think that we're right to keep on stressing, as we do at the Britain Palestine Project, that equal rights should be our mantra in everything that we do.
I agree with that again. The equal rights point, Ramez Susu, one of our key supporters, said to me one day, two states, maybe, equal rights, yes. Equal rights is the foundation. I don't know whether recognition by the UK and others of the State of Palestine will help to achieve that. I believe it may, but the key point is equal rights. And I don't really see how anybody sensible can argue against equal rights, mutual security, shared security, maybe with international guarantees as a way forward. Because what Israel is doing right now is re-antagonizing its neighbors, be they in Syria, in Lebanon, in Palestine. They're steering clear of Egypt and Jordan, with whom they've got peace treaties, but they have antagonized the populations in those places. They seem to be, well, they are engaged in ethnic cleansing at the very least, possibly genocide in Gaza. They're not listening to people advising them to hold back, to go for negotiation. This particular extremist government is the worst we've had. It's not unique, but it is the worst that we've had. And the next elections in Israel are in late 2026. So I think caution and prudence and not pessimism, because I think we owe to these peoples, we owe them hope, but to work for hope. Optimism is a gift, but we should work for hope. But it all depends, I think, on the United States to a certain extent, always to a certain extent, and Europe and the Arab neighbors of Israel saying to Israel, enough is enough, stop that, and meaning it. That can either be by sanctions. I don't see America sanctioning Israel, but sanctions, or behind the scenes pressure that delivers the same outcome. At the moment, we're seeing very little. There are these humanitarian corridors and tactical pauses, but that looks to me to be insufficient, very much insufficient. And will it be sustained? We don't know.
It is, and we're running up against what is the limits of the practical and the possible. There are calls for the Navy to be deployed to be able to deliver aid. There are calls for humanitarian corridors that will be protected by international peacekeeping forces to be able to go in there. But I don't see anyone in practice, I wish I could, choosing to challenge the Israeli armed forces and potentially get into a fight with them about it. We have to remember that there is long-standing intelligence cooperation between the UK and Israel on this and a whole number of other subjects. So it might be difficult in practice to be able to put some of these solutions into effect. But I want to change the subject, Vincent. I want to come to a subject that we have flown as a flag, and that is recognition of Palestine by the UK. It's something you have long called for personally, and we have made it a demand, a central demand from the Britain Palestine Project. But there are others, as you know perfectly well, inside government and outside, who say it won't make a jot of difference, that it won't actually influence things, and that absent any other actions, that it really is simply what is described as a performative act. Would you accept that description?
No, but I've heard it from former members of the diplomatic service, and I refute it. I think Macron's right. I didn't really expect him to do what he's done, but he's done it, and he's taken the flak with a bit of criticism from Rubio and a lot of criticism from Israel, including the son of Netanyahu. The issue for me is this: recognition by the UK is overdue. We have a historic responsibility for this mess, and recognition of Palestine begins to install parity of esteem by the United Kingdom for these two peoples. Frankly, we have played up to one and played down to the other. It confirms the right to self-determination of both peoples, separately or together. I don't much mind, but one way or the other, the right to self-determination of these peoples needs to be upheld, correct, confirmed. Recognition does that in two countries. Apart from the parity of esteem point, it keeps alive, more than on paper, I would say, the prospect of two peoples with equal rights, possibly in two states, and mutual security, which is UK government policy, Conservative and Labour, for the last 40 years. And I think we need to put our actions where our words have been for that length of time. It confounds the present claim of the Israeli government that they own it all, that they have claim sovereignty of over all the land, Eretz Israel, Gaza and the West Bank, as well as what the world now recognizes to be Israel, 78% of mandate Palestine. And this week, the Knesset voted to say all of that is ours. I think recognition says no to that.
So go beyond that, though. I want to push you a little bit, because beyond actually the declaration, what kind of steps would you, as a former ambassador, advise to the government should be taken to give it teeth?
Right. I would rely on something that we'll also talk about a bit later. I think I'd rely on international law. International law is one of the few cards that the Palestinians hold. International law is on their side in saying that the occupation of 1967 is unlawful. That comes in the International Court of Justice advisory opinion, on which our government is strangely silent 1 year on. Very strangely silent. I think Lord Hermer will have given his opinion, the Attorney General, many moons ago, and I think it's under a carpet in number 10 Downing Street. But what it says, among other things, is Israel to get out, the settlements to be disbanded, and the settlers to get out, compensation to the Palestinians for harm done. And that creates a vacuum that, in my opinion, could only be filled by a Palestinian state in East Jerusalem, the rest of the West Bank, and Gaza. What does it mean to recognize this state? It means working to ensure that our government does nothing to assist the occupation. That's also in the advisory opinion. And that includes banning settlement trade, because clearly settlement trade assists the occupation.
Absolutely.
I would also contend that failure to recognize, ironically, failure to recognize actually prolongs the occupation, because if you don't put your actions where your mouth is, then the other side, the Israelis, can carry on as before. And it's also important to think, why are the Israelis so upset about the occupation? Why has Yair Netanyahu told Macron in no uncertain terms where to get off. Because the way in which Israel started in 1948, it was by war, but also by a quick connivance with the US and by securing UN membership almost immediately. Took us a couple of years longer than others, but they secured membership in late 48, I think, 48, 49. And one way in which it happened was by states recognizing the state of Israel. So I think the Israeli government knows full well that recognition carries with it a certain sense of international integrity, which means that Palestine can't be wiped away. And one of the aims of this Israeli government is to wipe Palestine away. And we have 147, roughly 147 countries which have recognized Palestine. I admit it hasn't changed the situation on the ground at all, but our country has got a reputation for actually adhering to international law. And this government came into office saying it would. Now, that tells me that we should recognize, but that we should also take steps. And I don't regard recognition as an end. Recognition is a beginning of a change of attitude, which will also impact on our relationship with Israel. Because I did say that we should do nothing to assist. I think we should do everything to enable them, to make them desist from the occupation, which is really the end game. I don't see anybody sensible wishing to make the state of Israel go away. Nobody in the Western world can or would wish to do that. But the idea that they should be compelled or persuaded, but it looks like compulsion to me, to leave the occupied Palestinian territories is important and necessary, I believe. And that action of pressure, I think, will be increased in this country by getting through, if you like, the gateway of recognition.
Vincent, we've touched on the subject of settler violence a couple of times already, and it's very much the subject of the day. We got the sad news just yesterday that someone who we cared for, who we'd brought over to the UK together with the mayor of the hamlets of Mazafayata, the villages of Mazafayata, which has been under threat of eviction for some time, many years now, that he was sadly killed yesterday in a attack, apparently shot by a violent extremist settler. Now, this was really something that brought home to all of us the personal nature of this. We're going to be showing a short tribute to him later on at the end of this program, but I think we should reflect just a little bit on what are the causes of this settler violence. Why have they been able to get away with it so much? Can you comment on that? You used to work in the field.
I did, and it isn't the first occasion. It's a very sadly, the most personal tragedy that I've seen. But the role of the occupying power, it sounds a bit legalistic, but it's true. The role of the occupying power, in one sense, is to look after the occupied people. That isn't happening. Israel has signed up to the Geneva Conventions, but ignores them when it chooses. And one way of ignoring them is to instruct the Israeli Defense Forces and the Israeli army, let's call it that, and the police to protect the settlers and to ignore the Palestinians. Now, that's the wrong way around, but what it means is that the settlers, not all of them, but the violent settlers, of whom there are too many, ideologically motivated violent settlers who believe that the land is theirs and it's their job to get rid of anybody else. It's Jewish supremacism, by another word. They have impunity. Cases are opened and then the file is closed a couple of years later with nothing done. I witnessed that in my time in Jerusalem. On this occasion, our friend, Audeh al-Hadlin, God rest him, he was doing nothing. He was hit on the head by the boom of an earth-moving equipment, and then let's call him a terrorist, an Israeli settler who is already on the UK warning list of violent settlers. So he's on our books, and he was on America's books until Trump removed Biden's list of settlers to be censured and to be banned from travel. He has been arrested. I'm hoping there'll be an autopsy, and that in that instance there can be a charge, and that this criminal will go to jail. But it's part of this impunity, and it's been made worse in recent years by the arrival of Ben-Gvir and Smotrich into positions of power, brought in by Netanyahu for his own political gain and survival, more survival than gain. But the argument is that he's in thrall to these extremists. I don't think that's true. I don't want to personalize it, because this isn't just about Netanyahu, but Netanyahu has used them, and he's never gainsaid them. So I fear that with the presence of Ben-Gvir as the Minister for National Security, which is terrible as an idea, this will continue unless the friends of Israel, including the US, say clearly this must stop, and there will be retribution, there will be consequences if it doesn't. We've sounded off about settler violence and settlement expansion for decades, but we haven't acted. With Trump in office, it's rather hard to predict what he will do. He moves around mentally, but I'm hoping that one of the outcomes of this cabinet discussion will be a sterner line with Israel on these crimes in Gaza, crimes in the West Bank.
I would call for four things from our government. First of all, as you rightly said, there needs to be proper legal accountability for the culprit, an exemplary punishment to be able to deter others. Secondly, compensation for the families of the victim, Aude in this case. Thirdly, I think that there needs to be a serious commitment on the part of the Israeli government to stop these vigilantes, these terrorist settlers going around with free license to do what they will, including often with the tacit support or active support of IDF soldiers in the area. And the final thing would be to be able to stop the eviction of these people from their homelands, or from the lands which they have lived on for many years. They're simply fighting to stay on their own land. So I think we should make those demands of our own government, and I hope you.
I think we should, and the fact that they already have this criminal on their books, so to speak, in their sights, tells me that we should make that démarche. We should make that approach, and maybe ask our supporters to engage on it with their MPs, because it will take some effort to get our government to move. And I think that the more we can engage our friends and supporters in that effort, the better. So that could be something we take forward from now on. If I can, and I would just ask everybody to stick around at 4 o'clock for 3 or 4 minutes, 5 minutes, just to catch the very moving tribute that our member, our friend Lara Birdleakey has done on Aude, the late Aude Al-Hadlin. I've got one more question for you, Andrew. I can see the time is slipping, but pressure points. Where can we put leverage? Where can we exert leverage on our government? Whatever comes out today from this cabinet meeting, frankly, won't be enough. It won't meet our wishes, our needs. We need to keep pushing. I hope, but we'll see that the issue of recognition will be dealt with. I'm hoping, but it isn't enough. We've talked about other measures, but where do you see the pressure points, and how can our own charity work to generate pressure so that our parliament and our government actually heeds the views of the general public?
Well, the first point is to ask the government to be able to live up to its own words that it's committed to upholding international law. That has to be the starting point. So release the advice from the Attorney General about Britain's obligations under the International Court of Justice's advisory opinion. Implement the actions that are going to be taken from that. stop all arms sales. We've been saying these things repeatedly, that the government has only done limited amount of arms sales, but I think there should be a ban on both ways of all. In fact, I would go further and say all forms of military cooperation, and think that that is something which is commensurate with the situation at the moment. I would go for a halt to trade with the with any West Bank entities. In fact, I would go further than that and say we should be stopping all forms of cooperation, cultural, artistic, academic cooperation with any entity or individual living in the occupied territories. That would have a salutary effect. I'd come up with a package of measures, not simply one drip feeding into another in response to pressures. I'd come up with something meaningful and let that be a salutary shock.
I would add one more, which is now that we've left the European Union, we can talk to ourselves about what we do. We don't have to consult anybody on the economic side. So in addition to that ban on settlement trade and the other issues that you've mentioned, we could suspend our bilateral trade and partnership agreement with Israel, which is the core document. That would mean Israeli goods would still come into the UK and vice versa, but at a higher tariff. And I think that the only way to reach the general public in Israel, whom eventually we need to reach, is via economic measures. I don't see a better way. There may be merit in the settlement cultural actions that you mentioned and educational actions, withdrawing any cooperation from Ariel University in the middle of the West Bank, for instance, stopping football cooperation because there are football teams from the settlements in the Israeli League. But these are things that have happened with South Africa in the past. But it's the economic angle that I think is vital. We're coming to a close of our part, I think, Andrew, but just to take you back to IHL and the issue of the genocide case brought by South Africa against Israel. The UK has not joined that case, but the ICJ has twice or three times now announced provisional measures against Israel, which it has flouted. The provisional measures saying to Israel, get aid in at scale and at volume and now. And blatantly, they haven't done it. So may I ask you, what should the British government be doing about that? And where do you see our charity on the question of genocide?
I personally believe that the threshold, and it's a high one, for judging whether genocide is taking place has been met. I've been involved in other situations around the world where genocide has been alleged or has been said to have been committed in Myanmar, in Iraqi Kurdistan, and I believe that this more than meets that standard. So I would be saying we are in a situation where there is clear evidence of genocide, and it's the obligation on the part of all state parties to it to prevent that happening. So the government has a preemptive action to take in order to be able to prevent that happening. And that has certain very clear measures that flow from it. I would also say that as a charity, we ought to be arguing that this is a subject which is so grave, but at the same time, we cannot ignore the other crimes that are taking place, individual crimes. There needs to be legal accountability for those who are involved in it. So if, for example, there are dual citizens, British, Israeli dual citizens who've served in the IDF and have been in Gaza, I think they should be warned that they risk prosecution for war crimes. This is something that I think would get some attention.
Yeah, I would simply add on that there are a couple of more things in my head. One is introducing a visa regime for settlers. It's not the same as genocide, but a visa regime for settlers so that those who are living on the same land as the Palestinians should have the same visa regime as the Palestinians. At the moment, Israelis enter the UK freely, whether they're settlers or whether they're Israelis proper, if I could put it that way. And it would be possible for the Home Office to introduce a regime where settlers, by their address, had to apply to the to our Consulate General in Jerusalem and to Ramallah to get the visa, and that would at least put them on an equal footing. And there are other measures that could be taken. One particular one for this government, and its pride in being an upholder of international law, is the issue of the ICC, which you touched upon. But the ICC is under the cosh. Karim Khan has moved sideways to answer some allegations, but he is under pressure from the United States. Others who have helped to produce and evaluate the evidence that led the ICC to introduce the 5 arrest warrants against Hamas and Israeli politicians, are facing sanctions from the United States. I haven't heard much from Keir Starmer about that.
No, that's true. Vincent, we're overrunning our time, and I think we now need to give the floor to Deanna and to the questions that I know have been piling up.
Yeah, we have had many questions, so apologies in advance. We're not getting through a fraction of them, but we're going to try to touch on each of the topics that people have wanted to have some expansion on. I just want to start with a comment from RS, who I believe is Roger Spooner, the founder of our organization, Britain Palestine Project, formerly Balfour Project. And he says, if recognition were merely performative, the Israelis wouldn't be so frightened. And I just wanted to chip in as a British Palestinian, how much it would mean for Britain to show that support. And then obviously I would like it followed up by action. But I'm going to start with a question from Christopher Ward. 140 countries have recognized Palestine to scant effect. Why would one more make a difference?
Shall I try that
That's
one?
For you, Vincent. That's for you.
Yeah. Why would one more make a difference? Well, because it's us. Let's start with us. This charity works on us. We try to influence the UK, civil society, which we're all part of, Parliament, which we elect, and our government, which is supposed to do what we say. We can try to influence ourselves. I do think that recognition can change the mindset. I listed some of the reasons earlier, but changing the mindset in the UK to one which overtly, openly respects, publicly respects equality between Israelis and Palestinians, does not prioritize the big economy over the small economy, the big military power over the non-military power, but the people as equals. That seems to me to be an important principle, and it's not just a principle, it can be a practice. And since that first people that we have recognized as a state are, through their government and armed forces, oppressing the other, we need to work to stop that. And I think recognition of that second state opens doors for that.
Thanks for that. Another question on recognition, and then I'm going to move on to one of the other topics you covered. This is from Liga Par. In your opinion, what is the reason for UK's reluctance to recognize Palestine?
It's never been the right time. Which is this political story. I was around in 2011 when William Hague said in Parliament, we reserve the right to recognize Palestine at a time of our choosing and when will it have the most effect on peace. It's still the line trotted out by the Labour government today, and Conservatives for that matter. There was a hope. It's a wishful thinking hope, as I look back, but I was part of it in the period 2010 to 2014, that direct negotiations, maybe under American supervision with European support and Arab support, could produce a negotiated two-state solution. We're past that, and my wishful thinking has gone. We are now at a stage, I think, where this Israeli government is committed to one-state supremacy and subordination or expulsion of people it doesn't like, the Palestinians, and the rest of the world needs to make its mind up on what to do about that. It doesn't sound like a negotiating sphere for me. It sounds like one of persuasion and coercion to ensure that the state, which is bullying people into submission and expulsion, is made to stop. Now, that's hard work. It's not what governments want to do in the West, and it needs effort. and it needs cooperation between the UK and Europe and the Arab world, and ideally the United States. But the United States has always been the one to talk to Israel first and then present a solution to the Palestinians as a fait accompli. And I don't see that as a way forward either. But why not? It's partly the power of the Israeli lobby, which is well-oiled and is effective. It's partly hesitation. It's partly that there's always an argument, even in cabinet, for not now. And I think that the time has come. The time is long past.
We've got quite a lot of questions on the IHRA and the JDA definitions of anti-Semitism and so forth. We do have a webinar coming up in September on that, so bring all of those questions to that webinar. That will be with John McHugo, historian and lawyer who is an expert on this subject. I've got an interesting question from Laura Marshall-Clark. How do you think Jeremy Corbyn and Zahra Sultana's new party will influence the British government's position on Palestine now and in the future? And might it affect our work as the BPP?
Well, that's an interesting one. I suspect that it's going to be further pressure on parts of the Labour Party, which are already uncomfortable with the situation. And I think that it's going to make some people in the government rather uncomfortable about it. And it's going to act as their conscience. I hope that it's an issue which will be maintained after recognition. This is something which we need to keep in mind, is that there is a day after recognition. It's not an end in itself, and that they will keep up the pressure for principled actions by the government, as it says that it plans to do.
I agree. And the prospect of 400,000 people signing up to this new party is a big deal. They don't have many parliamentarians at the moment. I think there'll be 5 or 6 in the core of the new party. The Independents plus Corbyn plus one other who left the Labour Party. So they are more of a potential threat. But what it symbolises, I think, is that this issue, is a very radicalizing issue. It's an issue that divides as well as unites. It unites us, but it divides in the country. And the way in which our government handles it will have a huge impact on community relations in the UK. We haven't talked about the Jewish communities in the United Kingdom, and we should say a word about them. I believe, I'm not Jewish, I believe that the Jewish communities are divided. There was the effort by about 1/10 of the membership of the Board of Deputies to stand up, and they've been reproved by the Board of Deputies for so doing and for saying enough is enough to Israel. But that is symbolic, I think, of a deeper unease within the Jewish communities in the UK about the direction of travel of Israel, which is towards ethnic cleansing, which is towards apartheid, and as Andrew said, in his and indeed my personal opinion, towards genocide. And that is unacceptable in any terms. And it is causing deep, deep disquiet. So how our government tackles this will have a huge impact on community relations within the UK. And there needs to be effort to ensure that members of the Jewish community, of course, feel safe, in our country. They must, and that anti-Semitism is not tolerated. But at the same time, that the effort for equal rights continues. And as Andrew said, recognition, if it comes, is not the end in itself. It will not stop the work of this charity. The charity will continue to ask for more than this government currently is prepared to give.
Vincent, you've spoken about the Jewish communities. Let me ask you very quickly if you could say a word on the role of Christian communities here and whether they should be doing more.
Yes. Short answer is yes, they should. There are several Christian charities which are hyperactive. The Amos Trust, Embrace the Middle East, CAFOD. They are, the Church of Scotland, are active and vocal. The churches themselves, Anglican and Catholic in particular, the ones that I know best, We have patrons from each, Bishop Jim Curry from the Catholic Church and Christopher Chesson from the Anglican Church. They too are vocal. The issue is reaching the top in the Catholic Church. The top is the Pope, of course. And he has been pretty active, the past one and the present one. But there does need to be more. And that interface between churches and politicians is the way in which the churches, I think, can influence more directly. There are Anglican bishops who speak loudly in the House of Lords. But it's behind the scenes that we need more pressure on our government to do more, because this is a moral and a humanitarian issue as well as a political one.
Absolutely.
So we've had a bunch of questions, so I'm going to collate them about what would you say about the need for a definition of the borders before recognition of the State of Palestine? Is that required? Is that necessary before Britain can recognize the state?
No, it's not.
I'm not into that. The old story from the British government was that Jerusalem is the capital of both states. That's been the line for 15, 20 years. The International Court of Justice, in this opinion that the British government has so far managed to smother in terms of comment, says East Jerusalem and the rest of the West Bank and Gaza are occupied territories which are illegally occupied. So the legal position is clear. I'm not expecting Keir Starmer, if he does announce recognition, or when he does, to delineate the borders. He doesn't need to. The ICJ, in one sense, has done it for him. And if there are to be negotiations, if ever there are to be negotiations, it should be about fine-tuning rather than about principle.
And I would remind viewers that Israel was admitted entry to the United Nations and recognized by a large number of states back in 1948 without any defined borders. And that is a critical issue that remains to be settled. It's not possible to be able to define the borders of both in advance.
Thank you for that. We've got a question from Ronald Mendel to Vincent. What would you say to contest Netanyahu's view that a Palestinian state would threaten the existence of Israel and reward terrorism?
I would refute it. My time was spent in Ramallah, East Jerusalem, occasional visits to Gaza, regular but occasional visits to Gaza. I think I have a clear assessment of the caliber of the Palestinian people. They are not terrorists. They are not seekers of land. They want to preserve what they have. That is true. And they are being evicted from it by foul means. So what I find depressing and actually wrong-headed about the current Israeli policy is that there is a belief that Netanyahu has stated that Israel must always live by the sword. Think about that for a minute. It means Israel must always have the sword in its hand, and if there is any sniff of trouble, must fight to repress, to defend itself, it would say, but to repress. And that's not a good way to live. It would be a necessary way to live if it was the only way, but it isn't the only way. If these two peoples are allowed, enabled, empowered to live side by side in peace and to flourish, the vast majority in both will want that. That's what we want for our kids, which is so sadly lacking in Gaza now. A better life for our kids than we had. Frankly, even life for our kids in Gaza is almost impossible now, and that's very saddening. But that's what people want, and governments should respond to the wishes of people, Now, right now, I'm afraid the people of Israel, in their majority, having voted for a combination of Netanyahu plus, are living with the consequences of that. I hope that they can be persuaded that there is a better alternative, which is called peace, and it's genuine peace, because what Netanyahu has done is cloak himself in this cloak of security, but he has made the Israeli people less safe by so doing. Not alone, but he has been the sort of the puppet master in that.
I would go a bit further than you, Vincent. I believe that the dreadful situation we're in today and the sense of helplessness that so many governments demonstrate towards Israel in the face of its actions, which are utterly abhorrent in the Gaza Strip and no less in the West Bank, comes back to Israeli exceptionalism. It comes back to the fact that for years Israel has been able to get away with flouting UN resolutions, flouting international law, and there's been no consequences whatsoever. And it's the glaring contrast between that and the way in which we have stood up for the rights of the Ukrainians, which sticks in so many people's throats, and which makes us realize that actually there is one law for one and one law for another. Now, if we don't start to redress that and start rebuilding trust in the British government's words that it is upholding law impartially, even-handedly, then I think we're in difficulties, because I think that must be the starting point.
I agree with you. That point about consistency. Consistency is all. If you are not consistent in your foreign policy, then people don't trust you anywhere. That's what we have found. And the idea that we can have one set of cherry picking for Ukraine and non-cherry picking for Palestine, Israel is just wrong. There is a menu of actions that can be taken by a determined government and by this coalition of the willing that Keir Starmer has assembled on Ukraine, rather laudably, but it is lacking on Israel-Palestine. Now he's talking about another different coalition of the willing with several other European states and I hope Arab states. Let's hope that that doesn't lead to stasis, that it leads to action, and that includes punitive action for crimes.
So I was going to ask Frank Spencer-Nairn's question about whether Israel is sowing the seeds of its own demise, which you kind of touched on, but sadly it sounds like it's also Britain sowing the seeds of its own demise with its response to this issue. I'm going to instead move over to Sandra Hamrouni's question. She was the director of the British Council in Jerusalem for a while and also one of our trustees for a while. And so the question is on equal rights. Does the equal rights focus become problematic when Palestinian refugees and their descendants are deemed to be equal to Jews from Eastern Europe and Russia who are living in illegal settlements, or those who have not yet moved to Palestine, Israel? The right of return is enshrined in international law, but is rejected by the vast majority of Israelis. What thinking has been done on this difficulty of equal rights as opposed to equity?
It's an important issue. Let me start on that, and perhaps, Vincent, you want to add some thoughts to it. I mean, the right of return of refugees is a core issue, as I know from my own work with UNRWA and study of the refugee problem, and I don't believe there should be any equation with the rights of Jewish refugees. But the issue comes down to law also, to the Israeli law, which permits any Jew anywhere in the world to be able to return to Israel or to move to Israel. Return is not the right word. They call it return. But I think any solution to this problem which addresses the needs for people to be able to move to the territories of one or the other needs to be ensuring that there is parity of legal systems that affect both equally.
I agree. I don't have much to add. I understand Sandra's question, and I do see a distinction between the current freedoms of the migrants from Iraq and from Morocco and elsewhere in the Arab world who've come into Israel. Some of them are now in settlements, and the ICJ has ruled, has advised, that their presence is illegal. They have choices. One choice would be to move into Israel proper. I don't see, therefore, a direct equation, but I've heard it from Israeli sources that one should pay attention to both. I look at the situation on the ground. The Palestinian people in the diaspora are in varying degrees of freedom and constraint. In Lebanon, they can't work. In Syria, it's currently chaotic. In Jordan, they're in a better place. And in the Western world, obviously, they're fellow citizens. The idea that we should stop the pressure on withdrawal from the occupied territories in order to address the wider issue of refugees seems to me to be wrong. We have people living in the occupied Palestinian territory, which should be Palestine and is Palestine, as somebody said, for more than 142 countries. They are suffering. We need to work to alleviate that suffering legally and economically, and that is the current priority. The issue of the right of return is sacred. It needs to be dealt with, but it doesn't stop us attacking the first problem.
Exactly.
So again, we've had this question in many different forms from many of our viewers today. For example, Rachel Hunt, Gabrielle Hodgson. Is there anything that individuals can do here in the UK to help? What would you advise our viewers?
I'll speak briefly. This may sound like a broken record, but communication with your MP, even if they don't communicate back, is important, because in a way, MPs rely on you for their future. And particularly in the rather volatile political situation in the UK right now, we've heard about this potential new party. The attention span of MPs for what their constituents are thinking has grown, has developed. So MPs matter. Public demonstrations of how appalled we are by what's going on in Gaza and in the West Bank are important. I respect and admire the marchers that the PSC and others organise so often. They are peace marches, not hate marches. But I come back to Parliament and government, because in the end, the government makes the decisions that will either improve the situation or allow it to become worse. And influencing our government through Parliament is a way to do it. Somebody talked earlier about the churches. That's another angle. If you are a churchgoer, make a fuss. That's entirely legitimate, and I respect that action. Andrew, do you have more?
Well, I think you've touched on it. We need to build coalitions of support. I think these do exist in different forms around the country. I know many examples, as you must do, and our viewers must do as well, of local meetings. They should join forces around particular campaigns, particularly on the key issues. We demand a ceasefire now. We demand a complete withdrawal of Israel from the occupied territories. We demand actions by our government. Just press the government to be much stronger, much bolder than it is at the moment.
I've just seen the Ames family saying only the US can make a difference. We don't live there. We're here. We can make a difference here. And I believe that the UK has more leverage than it pretends. And I want this government, because it's the one we've got, to do more. And I don't want it to wait for Trump's permission.
Thank you both. I'm going to turn to you for final thoughts in a minute, for your final words, and then we're going to be playing our tribute to Audu, which I would love people to stay and watch. In the meantime, I just want to say that we offer these webinars for free, and we would very much appreciate if you can to make a donation. I'm going to pop the links in the chat box, so do consider making a donation. Every little bit helps. I know it's a cheesy line that you hear every charity say, but it really does. And also we have our friends of the Britain Palestine Project, where if you sign up to give any amount monthly, you become a friend and you have access to some of our exclusive friend events or preview tickets to some of our other events, as well as discounted and free tickets to those events. So please do consider it. It really helps us. It helps us with our planning, with our budgeting. It reduces the admin. We're a very small team trying to do a lot. So we'd really appreciate it. I've popped those links in the chat box. I'm also going to pop in, before we turn to Vincent and Andrew, a link to our mini-series podcast, which is by Lara Bird-Leakey, one of our consultants. She is absolutely fantastic, and she's created a podcast called International Law in Crisis. Her background is in law. I recommend it. They're quite short episodes with lots of different specialists. Our latest episode is with our very own director, new executive director of our Britain Palestine Project, Dr. Brian Bivati. Please do check that out. And she will be in conversation with me in the tribute. She knew Aude very well. She worked on bringing him over. I will let her speak in her own words, but I've popped a link to that podcast as well. And so now I will hand over to the two of you for your final words. So Vincent, do you want to?
Thank you. I'll begin. I'd like to read out a short declaration by the UK, France and Germany. It isn't today. There needs to be an agreement on the borders of the two states based on June 4, 1967 lines with equivalent land swaps, security arrangements that for Palestinians respect their sovereignty and show the occupation is over, and for Israelis protect their security, prevent terrorism and deal effectively with threats. A just, fair and agreed solution to refugees, fulfillment of the aspirations of both parties for Jerusalem. As I said earlier, Jerusalem as the shared capital was the line. I'd just like to say that was the E3, UK, France and Germany, talking in February 2011 and calling for to welcome Palestine as a full member of the UN by September 2011. We will contribute to achieving this goal in any and every way that we can. Doesn't life repeat itself? And it's time that happened. Over to you, Andrew.
Thanks, Vincent. Well, you bringing back those words from the past reminds me, as it probably does to many on this call, that there have been so many moments when governments have made pious statements which have gone by the wind and nobody has paid any attention to them. There should have been a Palestinian state in 1998, as I recall, after the Oslo Accords. So I think that we should say that we need to seize on this particular moment in order to be able to try to turn some potential good out of the tragedy. There's no other word for it that is taking place in Gaza. I will not choose words that are inflammatory, but to say that we as the Britain Palestine Project don't operate in a vacuum. We work with partners, and it's important that all of us put our efforts together, working in the same direction to try to be constructive of actually saying this situation has to change and can change if we put our efforts together.
So I would like to thank you both for coming to speak with us today. And like I said, we're going to now turn to our tribute. Please do stick around and watch it. It's quite moving. So thank you again, Andrew, Vincent. Hi, I'm Deanna Safia. I work with the Britain Palestine Project, and I'm joined with Lara Bird-Leakey, who is our host of International Law in Crisis, our other podcast that you can catch on all of our podcast streams. Lara, we wanted to talk to you about the incredibly sad news that we've been following. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what's happened in the last couple of days?
So we found out yesterday that Aude Hathaleen, who was a journalist and a teacher and a campaigner in the village of Khair in Masafiata, was killed by an illegal Israeli settler. He was shot while he and his cousins were trying to stop an Israeli bulldozer coming into Khair to destroy their homes. It is one of the greatest losses, and every single Palestinian loss is a devastating loss. But Aude was known to BPP personally, and he was a friend of mine, and so this particular loss is even more devastating to us. He was an incredible man who, not by choice, but by default of being Palestinian and of being born in the West Bank, spent his entire life advocating and campaigning for the rights of Palestinians and advocating not to have his home destroyed.
And we know, obviously, all of the unreported deaths of Palestinians in the West Bank since October 2023. Each of them has this story of leaving behind loved ones, family members, wives, children, and so forth. But this one hit us hard as an organization because we had been working with him, and as you said, he became friends. Tell us about the amazing visit that you managed to orchestrate for him and the mayor of Masafiata over here, and who they met and how that went.
We started working with Aude in 2023, and it was on the back of a campaign that would run with the BPP called Save Masafiata, which had been in response to an Israeli Supreme Court judgment which said that the area that Khair is in could legitimately be used as an IDF firing zone, despite the fact that there were homes and farms and families who lived there. And that judgment meant that there was authority for settlers and for the IDF to come in and demolish these homes without warning, lots of the times, killing people in the process, severely harming people in the process, and destroying people's lives. And
it was actually our most successful email your MP campaign. It was the first one we did, and it was the most successful by far because it obviously resonated with people even over here, how wrong that was.
Yeah, people got really involved in it. I think you're right. It struck something with people, the idea that people's homes could just be destroyed at any given time.
Yeah.
And on the back of that campaign, we got to know Aude, and we realized it would be more powerful if he could be here in the UK to talk to politicians, to speak to people, to tell people what life was like in Masafiata, what life was like in Khair, and to make that personal for people here. So we started that process in 2023. It was completely derailed by the events in October 2023, and we weren't able to bring him over then. But we were able to bring him over in February 24, alongside Nidal Yunus, who's the mayor of Masafiata, and we were honoured to have them in London for a week. During that time, we met with MPs, we met with ministers, we met with foreign office officials, we spoke to civil society, and we went into universities. And every single time I heard Aude speaking, it completely moved me, because this was a young man who didn't know anything other than life under occupation, who had grown up having settlers coming in and tearing his house down, who had had his own house demolished 3 times in his life, who spoke to us about his 4-year-old son having a stutter because at the age of 2 he'd been attacked by an Israeli dog, and who hid under the bed every single night that he went to sleep because he didn't know if somebody was going to come and tear his house down, or if somebody was going to come into his house when he was sleeping. And this was a man who spoke not of international law or of policy, but who just told us what it was like to live like that, who told us what it was like when his elderly mother was sick and they couldn't take her to a hospital because settlers barricaded the roads and stopped them from driving out. Who told us of a period of over a year where the settlers would come and destroy the water pipes that fed water to the village, meaning that they couldn't drink themselves, they couldn't feed their animals, who had his own sheep taken away and killed by settlers to stop him from earning a living. This was a man whose entire life story, entire life reality, completely depicted the illegality and the barbarity of the Israeli occupation. And he spoke about the slow genocide that was happening in the West Bank.
Yep. It's a very different form of the occupation to what we see in Gaza, but it's devastating in its own way. He spoke at one of our webinars. I'll be popping links everywhere so people can watch that, because he's, like you said, he spoke amazingly and relayed what it was just like for normal people just trying to live everyday lives, raise your family, take care of your sick elderly parents. And he was absolutely amazing. So we do have some plans. As you know, we're trying to work out the logistics to help support that community further. And so we will be reporting back on that and sharing that far and wide. But I don't know if you want to talk a bit about the impact that meeting him had on you.
He was funny and he was kind and he was an entire person outside of being a Palestinian activist by force. You know, he was forced into that role because of the life that he was born into, not because he chose it. He was a journalist and he wanted to have a normal life. And I think that was the most striking thing when he would come and he would speak to Foreign Office officials or ministers or, you know, the head of Amnesty. All he wanted was to convey that Palestinians deserve to live normal lives. He wasn't asking for a lot. He wanted to be able to raise his children and he wanted to be able to feel safe. He wanted to be able to spend time with his family. And the question that Palestinians are always asked by anyone in the UK, by anyone who wants to do something, is what can we do and how do you keep going on a day-to-day basis? And his answer was always, we don't have a choice. We don't have a choice to do anything other than to resist and to hope that if we talk about it enough, some people might listen. And one of the things that I will always remember about him is the way that he was just so unfazed by the horrors that he would convey, because that was just normal life to him. But he was an entire person. He loved the Uber boat when we took him on it here, because he had never seen London before and he wanted to see it and he wanted to know about life in London and he wanted to hear what my life was like, because he was a friend and he was caring and he was so lovely to be around. And he touched people and got through to people all across the world because he was just a normal person who just wanted a better life and couldn't understand why we or the government could not help him get that. He couldn't understand why it wasn't simple in a way, because all they were asking for was a simple life.
Well, he was obviously featured in the film No Other Land. So if you haven't seen that film, or if you have and you want to watch it again, now's the time. We will definitely keep talking about him. We will definitely keep working on the issue of Masafer Yatta. It's very important to us. And thank you for talking about something I know it was really difficult for you.
Thank you, those that have stuck around to watch that tribute to Auder, and for being so supportive of everyone working on the issue as well as the issue itself. We are quite often working on it while dealing with loved ones the loss of loved ones, colleagues, knowing that what they're going through is incredibly difficult, and your support helps us to carry on as well. So thank you. We've got lots of lovely, kind tributes and kind words in the chat box. So I just wanted to thank you all as well for your support. Final thank you to Andrew and Vincent for coming along and talking to us. It was so useful. And I think we can all agree that Lara there was incredibly brave, because she got very, very close with Audi and did some amazing work on the Masafiyata, cause. And please do have a listen to her podcast, because she's a phenomenal woman doing amazing things. So I'm going to sign off now. Thank you so much, everyone, and hope to see you at the next one.